You know what I have more than anything else? Life's best teacher, experience. 30 years in EMS. Emergency medical services. The best part of my job, the biggest improvement I saw was the safety mechanisms come alive on the automobile. And I saw it all in between, and I was fascinated with all of it.
Welcome to the Crash Victim Life Survivor podcast. My name is Athanasia, and I will be your host on this journey of exploring the real impact of a road crash. Me and my guests, we will be sharing our own experience about road accidents. And through these personal stories that you will listen, we are hoping to raise road safety awareness, but also ignite that spark that will give you the drive to be safe and enjoy life. So stay around and enjoy with us this safe ride. Hi, I'm Athanasia Huvarda, host of the Crash Victim Life Survivor podcast and a fatal car crash survivor. I want to welcome you to the second episode of my podcast, a podcast that will take you through a journey of surviving real challenges with a purpose to reveal the real impact a car crash can have on lives. And not just on the lives of those involved, but also on the lives of everyone around them, from the very first responders to their families and friends. My guest today is a hero in the eyes of car victims, including mine. And I'm sure he will have us sitting at the edge of our chairs, sharing all the things he witnessed over the years of being a first responder. So please join me on welcoming Pat Dixon to the Crash Victim Life Survivor podcast. Pat.
Hi.
I'm truly honored to have you here today to share your point of view on the importance of road safety. I'm interested to know more how you came to be a first responder. Can you tell me a little bit about you and how you chose this path for your career?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, my name is Pat Dixon. I was a paramedic for 30 years in Thunder Bay. And out of those 30 years, I also worked for 10 years part-time on the air ambulance helicopter as well. And I went to college in 1988, and I went away just because basically I just like helping people, and it was just in me, and it looked really interesting. So I looked into it. I got accepted in a college course down in Southern Ontario. I went away to school, and I came back, and I worked for 30 years, and it was an awesome job. I went for 30 years until May of 2019 when I went off with PTSD.
Wow, that's a long time to work in this field. A tough job to do for 30 years. And I have to say that it doesn't surprise me at all that PTSD was a result of all the things that you witnessed and all the things that you have experienced over the years. But it does make me sad. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for helping all the people that you helped over your 30 years in paramedics. And that I'm sure it hasn't been easy. And I can say that because I can understand how difficult it was, judging from my own personal experience of being involved in a car crash and being the one that's injured. And I think that troubles me a lot is the false belief that we share, and I used to share it too, that it won't happen to me, which is also the title of this episode. And this false belief is usually one of the reasons that it does happen to us. And in my case, I think this played a big part when it came to my accident and how it happened. And for the sake of our listeners, I would like to explain how my accident took place. So we're four people in the car. It was me, my husband, and in the back seats were my friends, very close friends, a couple. And we were heading to a beautiful, popular summer destination close to my hometown. It was August. And because there was traffic, the driver, my husband at the time, he decided to get off the highway and follow a different route. It was perfectly fine. Okay, it was a more narrow, winding country road, but it was perfectly safe if you followed the safety rules and if you stayed within the speed limits, there was no problem. But unfortunately, in our case, things did take a different turn. And although I could see, that's my point, although I could see that the driver was speeding, and he was what we call an aggressive driver, just because he was putting his life at risk, my life, my friend's life, and also everyone else that was driving around us, of course, it still, to me, didn't feel like something bad could happen until it did. And it was a horrific accident. In one split second from it won't happen to me, it was now happening. It was real, and everything happened so fast, and there was no time to respond. Because he was overspeeding, he lost control of the car. We fell into a ditch, and the car hit the ground after a few flips. But the moment it hit ground, it was immediately engulfed in flames. And those memories will haunt me for the rest of my life, and I remember every single moment. And when I'm discussing this with others, and even more when I discuss it with young people, they seem to share the same belief I did back then. It won't happen to me. I would like to hear what your opinion is about this phrase.
Bad things happen to everybody. Nobody gets out of it unscathed in this world. People think bad things don't happen, but it happens all the time. It's much better than it used to be. Accidents are much less. The injuries are much less severe now than they used to be. But yeah, it's very common. It's bad stuff happens it's just part of living. You can't have the good without the bad, and that's the bad. But accidents like yours are actually rare because vehicles don't usually burst into flames like that. I haven't been to many accidents like that. I've been to hundreds, probably thousands of car accidents, and I think I've been to one or two maybe where it's burst into flames. Like in Hollywood does that all the time. But the reality is that doesn't happen that much.
What you said now about Hollywood is what I say to presentations that I give at schools. It's not like in the movies when you see a car that it's engulfed in flames and then you suddenly are scared of having this big explosion. No, but it can explode your life into 1,000 pieces.
Absolutely.
That's what I tell them. And I remember when it happened, there were people around that area that they just run towards, where the accident happened. And they literally, when I got out of the car finally, they dragged me away from the car because they were scared of this huge explosion, which never happened, obviously. I never had the opportunity to meet my first responders. And I often wondered how they felt upon looking at me at the first glance of my accident. Because in my mind then, although I was injured, I think I was too shocked to comprehend the real extent of my injuries the first moments. A few things about how I experienced my first moments in the car after the crash. I remember it felt like I was diving deep in the sea, and I wish that was the case, but instead it wasn't. I was burning alive in that car. Wow. Me, my friends, my husband were all engulfed in flames. And unfortunately, only 3 of us made it out. But my friend that was right behind me, he never got the chance and he never made it out. And his injuries were fatal from the moment the car crashed on the ground. And as I was sitting on the ground, totally in shock, totally unable to react, looking directly to the burning car, it was still in flames, I could hear the people around me calling for the paramedics. And that moment, I can truly say, is the worst moment of my life, just realizing what just happened. And the feeling of pain, and I'm mostly referring to the emotional pain rather than the physical, the feeling of despair, realizing that my friend, he was gone. In one split second, he was gone forever.
That is a horrific car accident you were in. I never went to many like that. You know, those were very rare. I've been to a lot of car accidents where there was fatalities. You know, I've been to lots of those, but not when there's people on fire and the vehicle's on fire. It does, like I say, it does happen, but nowhere near as much as people think it does. And when it does happen, it's incredibly traumatic for anybody witnessing that, whether you're a first responder or not. Bystanders witnessing that, watching somebody burn in a vehicle, it doesn't matter who you are. Anybody who sees that is going to be traumatized.
Yeah.
And I know one of my coworkers went to a call where a 12-year-old little girl was burned. Propane tank blew up in the car, and he saw that, and that messed him up for a long time.
Wow.
That messed him up for a long, long time. And that's one of the hardest things to watch. And you can only imagine if you have to see stuff like that day in, day out all the time. Thankfully, you know, accidents like that don't happen as much.
That is good. For me, when I was experiencing that, what really traumatized me, as you said, was that there was no turning back. And that emotional pain was there, and it took a while for the real physical pain to kick in. But when it did, I was in agony.
What were your injuries?
74% third and fourth degree burns on my body.
Oh my goodness.
I was in agony. And when I heard the sound of the ambulance approaching, and when I saw the paramedics just running towards me, it felt like I was seeing a bright light in a dark tunnel, hope. But over the years, I have often wondered how they felt. And I never met my first responders, and I always wonder how they felt. If seeing me that day darkened their day.
Yeah, it absolutely would darken anybody's day.
That's my point, that your story is rarely heard, and I would really like to know how you feel when you are called to deal with an accident that is as devastating, maybe not so devastating, but still devastating.
Like I mentioned before, I went off with PTSD in 2019, and after that day, I started going to therapy weekly. And what I learned in therapy was that stuff doesn't go away, and it doesn't just take care of itself. It just sits there until you deal with it. And if you don't deal with it, it will haunt you. It will haunt you in your dreams. It'll haunt you in your thoughts. But if you learn how to get it out of your head and onto paper with journaling, it changes everything, really, because that is how you come in contact with it. And that is how your brain slows down, because the writing forces your brain to slow down. And it allows you to look at the event from a distance. And when you look at the event from a distance and you can come in contact with that and you let it flow onto paper, you know, that is how you let it go. I was going to ask you, did you ever write what happened to you down? Have you wrote that out, your whole story about what you first remember at the accident scene, and write it out? Because it's incredible therapy to do that. It's very cathartic, and it's a game changer. And I wish I would have known this 30 years ago.
That was my next question. How many years did it take you to find this way of healing for yourself?
It wasn't until I went off sick with PTSD. And the most frustrating part is they don't teach first responders this up front. This should be taught to first responders when they first start. Given coping skills and learn how to process all of this stuff. Because what I was taught when I first started, I went up to one of my supervisors after a really horrific call, and I said, how do I deal with all this? It's hard to deal with it. And he told me, go home, have a couple beers, and try to forget about this shit. And no offense to him, but that's what everybody did. Everybody just went and said, I'm just going to have a couple beers and try to forget about it all. But that doesn't work. It never has, and it never will. You have to get in contact with that stuff. You have to come to terms with that. And once you come to terms with it via journaling, that's how you let it go. And that's the trick to all of it. And that should be taught in college. That should be taught in first year paramedic school or first year you're hired on at the fire department or police department, or if you're any first responder in the rules. Everybody should be taught these basic things on how to deal with the stuff you see. And another thing they never taught me in school, my whole career, was what to say to people like you. We just have to figure it out on our own. They don't tell us what to say. They don't teach us what to say to you. If that was my first day on the job, I would be just like any bystander there as far as what to say to you, And that needs to change, because not knowing what to say and then holding it all in because you don't have an outlet, you don't know how to let it go, is what's causing WSIB to skyrocket. And eventually, they're going to start putting psychology into these courses. And when you start putting psychology into the courses, then everybody benefits. Then I know what to say to you, and then I know how to get it out of my head onto paper.
Yeah, and what you said earlier, you asked me if I ever kept a journal. I didn't keep a journal on a regular basis, but now that you mention it, I did write a lot when I was, even before my accident, I used to write. I just found it easier to put my thoughts into paper. And I was keeping not every day, but when something really happened, even as a child, as a teenager, we go through all these different emotions and changes in our life. I remember I used to write. And now after my accident, well, it took me a while, but I am writing my own book about my experience. So I am diving deep into all the things that I learned. Yeah.
That's therapy right there. So but my question was, did you get into detail about the accidents, about what were you knocked unconscious at all?
I remember every single second.
Yeah. So did you write since you knew you were going to get into a car crash, put all that on paper? Did you you did, eh? Good. Yeah. Because that's a big part. That's huge right there, right?
The first responders, who are the ones that technically saved my life when they arrived there, it saddens me that they are the ones forgotten in the whole process. It's very similar to me and my story, where after the accident and the initial trauma, goes by, lots of people forget the rest of my story. They forget the middle part and the middle part, the healing part, and how everything happened. Those moments, how I experienced them. My first moments in the ambulance, when I reached the ER, all those moments, those were scary moments for me, and they are forgotten. And those are the moments that are most difficult. So just like the first responders and the paramedics, they are the important part of the reason why I'm still around and still alive. So would you be comfortable to share maybe some of the most impactful moments in your career as a paramedic, and how working in this field impacted your life in general, as a relationship, everyday life? I know you mentioned about PTSD. What was that like for you?
I really did love the job. It was an awesome job. I loved it. I got great satisfaction out of it. But like I say, I never learned. I was never taught on how to process all the stuff we see. And if there's an incident at a school where there's one traumatic event, they bring in counselors for the whole school, for all the students. What about the people who have to see it every day? They don't think about that. And
And I guess this affected your family as well. Like maybe
it affects PTSD is like a virus.
Exactly.
You end up infecting everybody in your family, because for most men, when it happens to them, they go downstairs and they self-isolate and they cut themselves off from their family members. And that causes devastation in the family. That leaves the wife and the children upstairs not knowing what to do. They're scared. They would love to know what to do, and they don't know what to do. So doesn't it make sense to teach them what to look out for and what to do if it happens? It makes perfect sense to teach the first responder and the family members.
Definitely.
To what to look out for. It's all about education. We need to educate the signs, the symptoms. You know, once people learn the signs and symptoms, then you know what to look out for.
But it's hard to learn that. Some people, I think they block also that part. Like they don't want to admit that they are going through PTSD, for example, or they have been impacted by something that they have experienced because of someone else's injuries. Like I can only imagine all the things that you have witnessed because of your job.
Yeah, I've been to like hundreds of suicides. And if you think that I've been to 5 a year for 30 years, that's 150. And I've been to more than 5 a year. And attempted suicides and women domestic abuse, all of it. It's very hard cleaning up after the wake of alcohol and the pharmaceutical industries. What those two industries do cause more havoc on society, and they cause more stress, anxiety, all of it for first responders. And the truly scary part is that many of us fall victim to those two things ourselves. The two things that cause more traumas to us than anything else. And by far, the first number one thing is alcohol.
Yeah.
Nothing causes more problems in society than alcohol. It's no contest. And the second thing is the pharmaceutical industry with their opioid overdoses. And I've been to a lot of those. I've told many parents that, sorry, there's nothing else we can do.
No.
And nobody does anything about it. And it's sad that they both have free reign on things, and they're leaving a path of destruction in its wake that's affecting first responders, which is spilling over into our families. And when the wife and children are upstairs, worried, scared, those kids are going to bed worried and scared. That's interrupting their sleep. That interrupts the way they mature and the way their body grows. And that's how you affect everybody. You affect everybody in your family by shutting them off.
Yeah, definitely.
And when you can learn to keep that lines of communications open with you and your spouse, it's a huge part of surviving in this job. And they need to teach people that.
And I know that you have been working on a very interesting project, a presentation that I was fortunate enough to listen to that presentation. Would you like to share a few things about that? What's your presentation about? Is it all about the journaling? Is it more? What is it about?
Yeah, it's called Coping Skills for First Responders. And what it is I put a lot of energy into this and it really helped me most of all, because this is where my energy went into for the last year and a half. And some days I would work on it 6-8 hours a day, just hammering it out. But what it is it's called Coping Skills for First Responders. And it is the stuff that I learned not only from psychology, but also from my occupational therapist. My psychologist and my occupational therapist both helped me a great deal with this. Because after I realized I wasn't going back to be a paramedic, I felt guilty because I was finding this to be so beneficial, this therapy for me, but I couldn't stop thinking about my friends that I left back at that place. So I wanted to put a lot of energy into this so I could share this learning, what I just learned over the last year and a half, with everybody. So one day I went to my therapist and I said, I'm not going back to work as a paramedic ever. And he said, yeah, well, you know what? You don't have to be defined as a paramedic. And then he said, you want to know why you melted down? You melted down because there was a complete lack of support in the workplace and no education. And that is why you melted down. And then he said to me, but you know what the best revenge is, Pat? The best revenge is a life well lived.
Mm-hmm.
Now go out there, find something you can be passionate about, and do good things.
What a great advice, huh?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? That man became my life coach. That's what my psychologist has done. He's just changed everything for me, changed my entire life. I went from being angry, just rage, and just negative, and just full of anger, to the happiest I've ever been in my life. And it's all because of psychology. And holding this back from other first responders is immoral as far as I'm concerned. Not teaching this is immoral. That's how good it is.
Mm.
Holding this kind of education back is not fair to the first responders, and it's not fair to the family members. Because once you learn it, and once the culture changes at work, that it's good to go talk to somebody. It's not good to hold it all in. It's not manly to hold it all in and go and have a couple beers and try to forget about this stuff. It doesn't work that way. It never has, and it never will. What does work is psychology. And I think that it was so profound for me that I think that in the future, those two fields are going to meet, and you're going to see much more psychology taught in the paramedic program on not only how to look after yourself, but also what to say to other people when you see them grieving. Because if you say the wrong thing to somebody else who is grieving, you can cause a lot of damage when they're in that, in that zone, that they're very vulnerable in that state. And that should be taught,
Definitely. I think you hit that nail to the head with that point, because every field where there's first responders, you as a paramedic, firefighters, they all need support. And I remember when going through my recovery process, at some point I was able to just, about 2 years later, to move around on my own. And I went to the firefighters station because I wanted to see the people that I couldn't find the paramedics, but I wanted to see at least the firefighters and say thank you to them for being there when I needed them.
Mm-hmm, good.
And I couldn't find the actual firefighters that were my first responders, but
right.
I spoke with other people there, and I thanked them for the work they do. And I asked them if they have any support, because as a burn survivor, I was looking for emotional support and physiotherapy, and there was nothing. That just listening that there was nothing, it devastated me. Why? They needed, they're dealing with so much grief and pain and agony all day.
It's all about money. It's all about money. You know what I feel like I'm saying? Listen, you can save a lot of money if you do oil changes on your car. If you do oil changes on your car, your engine will last way longer, and it won't break down on you in the middle of nowhere, causing you a ton of stress and anxiety. And you know what the system says? Oh, have you seen the price of oil? We're not spending that kind of money. That's what it feels like to me. Because my presentation focuses mainly on you. Only you can look after yourself. What does it tell you? What did they tell you to do with that oxygen mask that falls from the ceiling during emergency landing on an aircraft? They tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, even before your children. Why? Because you can't look after somebody else until you look after yourself first. And that is what it's all about. You have to learn how to put yourself first, look after yourself first, put your health first, because you're no good to anybody else if you're not firing on all cylinders. And focus on sleep and good health. This job it was a great job, but it takes its toll mentally every year. Every year goes by, it just keeps building and building and building and building until the volcano explodes. And you can only stretch an elastic band so far before it snaps. And mine stretched for 30 years and then it snapped. But you asked me about one of the highlights of my career. One of the highlights of my career by far was watching the safety of the automobile come to life. Because when I first started in 1989, I would go to an accident. This was before airbags. This is before anything. There was a little bit of damage to the vehicle, and everybody inside would have life-threatening injuries or major broken bones. And then I watched the airbag come into play. And the airbag that came into play started to be a game changer, because all of a sudden, instead of hitting the big steel dash, you're hitting a big pillow, poof, and you hit a pillow. And then the side curtain airbags came out. And when the side curtain airbags came out, the first vehicle accident I went to, a vehicle was on its side, and I saw my first side curtain airbag. And I was driving at the time, a 1992 Honda Accord. And I saw that, and I said, okay, I'm getting a new vehicle, because this is unbelievable. I do not want to be in my car, even though it was paid for. I didn't even want to drive around in it anymore. After what I was seeing, what airbags were doing. That's how impressive airbags were. And then they came out with electronic stability control, which wouldn't allow your vehicle to spin from side to side. And that was really amazing to watch, because wherever you point the tires, that's where your vehicle's going. So it cuts down accidents big time. And there's even a little cartridge in your seatbelt that when your sensor goes off, your airbag sensor goes off, if you get hit on the front and your sensor goes off, there's a little cartridge in your seatbelt that goes, it sounds like a little 22 going off, but you can't hear it because of the accident. But what it does, it's a retractor, and it pulls you back in your seat. So you've got a seatbelt pulling you back in your seat. You've got a retractable steering wheel coming at you and an airbag coming at you. And in town, over the last few years of my career, I very seldomly went to any accidents in town where anybody was hurt. In fact, I would get there and they'd be standing outside talking on their cell phone, complaining, saying, look at this thing, it just crumbled. I'm going to be late for work. And they're talking on their cell phone. And I'm thinking, you would have been dead 20 years ago. You would have been dead. And see that car? It just crumpled and it saved your life, I told them.
Yeah.
I used to go to lots of them where you would pull up and you would be like, there's no way anybody's alive in that vehicle. And not only are they not alive, they don't even want to go to the hospital. Their car's squished, but they landed on pillows. And they're like, no, I don't need to go to the hospital. And we advise them just because of the mechanism of the injuries. But it just doesn't happen much anymore.
Technology is great that it's evolving, and it's, of course, helping reduce all the car accidents. If only people would adopt this safety culture when it comes to road safety, can you imagine how much difference that would make if people were driving safer?
I think that autonomous car thing coming out is going to be the best thing for us, because it takes people. Now people are texting. That's worse than drinking and driving now. It's taken over as the number one thing. People text when they're driving or looking at their phone. Distractions, right? If you're not even looking at the road.
Like I say, it's like trusting your life to a blind driver.
That's a good line. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
When they're texting.
Yeah, it's true. One of the other things I looked for when I went to car accidents, I always looked for this, is how many people had winter tires on. Because all that safety mechanism stuff I just talked about, none of it touches the road. The only thing that touches the road is your tires. So the tires are hugely important. And living in Thunder Bay, you shouldn't even think about all season tires. It should be winter tires in all seasons, or winter tires and summer tires, whatever it is. You should be rotating your tires, because it's about the softness of the tire. And that's what gives you your grip. And winter tires are very soft, but they grab on ice and they grab on snow, and they slow you down so much better.
I will grab on that and say that we have to take our safety serious and just make all the modifications needed to our car, change our tires, make sure the seatbelt is working, make sure everything is running right. Do an oil change, slow down.
And slow down is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Almost all the bad accidents are almost all because of speed and alcohol.
Yeah.
The worst ones I ever went to were speed.
It's like they're competing.
And they go hand
in hand. Is it speeding? Is it text driving? Is it drinking? Like everything is just, it's like a competition. Who is going to hit the highest ranks of causes for a road accident?
Yeah.
It's all about us. That's what it is. It's our mentality and how we are out on the road, how we behave.
Yeah. Well, I had a front review on society of what not to do. And I learned that speed, just slow down, slow everything down. There's no rush, and I have to work at it every day because I'm a guy who's busy all the time. And, I have to tell myself, slow down every day, especially when I jump behind the wheel. I jump behind the wheel. I'm just like, slow everything down.
Yeah.
And what works really good for that is using breathing techniques. If you slow down your breathing rate to like 10 or 12 and just turn the stereo off and just focus on your breathing as you're driving, you'll just naturally slow down.
Yeah, and that belief that it won't happen to me until it does.
Yeah, it won't happen to me until you get hit by a drunk driver. So a lot of times it's totally out of your control. Yeah. You could be driving down the road, minding your own business, and next thing you know, you get smoked. That's how fast it happens.
Split second.
That happens in a split second. Even like, accidents happen in a split second. Another thing I don't do is look on my phone as I'm walking downstairs, because I handed out morphine to a lot of people. I administered morphine quite a few times for people who were texting, walking down the stairs, and they tripped and they broke their ankle.
Oh my!
I went to quite a few of those, and so I was like, okay, Pat, don't do that. And I have to remind myself when I'm walking with my phone in my hand and I'm at the top of the stairs. I still find myself doing it, but I just have to keep reminding myself, don't do that. That's not a good thing to do. Keep your eyes on, what you're doing.
There's some videos out there that they have, we are using them for our school presentations to be precise. There's a video that has lots of people walking on the street and texting, and you see them running, falling to the ground, or running on a pole, and it makes you laugh just to see that, because they are not really injured, but it's funny to see them actually getting hurt, getting mistracked by not watching.
I remember one of those first ones that came out. A woman was in a shopping mall texting, and she tripped and fell right into the pool.
But when you're texting and driving, that's a totally different story.
Yeah, it's not funny anymore.
Totally different. And the rest of the people that they're out there, why should they suffer? Why should they suffer just because we are reckless? That's my main point.
And how would you like to live with that?
The guilt with that.
Live with that? How would you like to, like the guy who was driving the vehicle you were in? Imagine living with that.
That's a different story that we are going to touch on a different episode, because for our listeners, this is for our listeners. Please stay tuned and you will hear more about what happened to the driver later. So for the listeners that would like to get in touch with Pat, they can email me anytime at the email that is provided through the podcast. And you can see all the details on the description of this episode. And feel free to send me any emails and I will forward them to Pat. And he will probably get in touch with you on a later date. So before we conclude, I want to ask you one final question. If you could say one thing to our listeners about road safety, what would that be?
Yeah, the message is slow down and pay attention. Keep both hands on your wheel. If you have both hands on your wheel, it's hard to text. If you have both hands on your wheel, it's hard to do anything, really. Put your hands at 10 and 2 or wherever you put your hands, and keep both hands on the wheel. If you do that and slow down, then, that takes a lot of stuff out of the equation.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. That's a great point. And as an injured person, and through sharing my own experience with other survivors, those first moments feel like you are, like you are outside your body. Like it's just too much to take in those first moments. And unfortunately, the help we receive from the paramedics is usually forgotten. So I am grabbing this opportunity today to say to you and to all the first responders, thank you for the work that you do. I am truly, truly grateful. Thank you. And thank you, Pat, also for being a guest on my podcast, sharing your experiences with the hope to raise road safety awareness. And maybe our listeners will think twice before putting their lives and the lives of others at risk. So thank you, Pat, for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me.
This is your host, Athanasia Ghouvarda, and my message to you is drive safely, live your lives, and allow others to live theirs. Stay tuned for my next episode where I'll be sharing the first moments in ER, in the emergency, the first days in the intensive care unit, and how reality hit me hard. See you all then.
One of the sad facts is that paramedics in Thunder Bay get $300 a year for psychology. That's not even enough for like 2 sessions. And that just doesn't make sense to me to do that. It goes back to my oil change analogy I was saying, put the money up front for the oil and your engine will last a lot longer. But if you don't put the money up front for the oil, then it's all about preventative maintenance. Everything's about preventative maintenance. And it only makes sense to educate all first responders and their family members about how to look after themselves and how to process it.